Colleagues, welcome to the first of our fourth term seminars under the auspices of our UJ Sociology, Anthropology and Development Studies Wednesday webinar series. So the theme for this term's webinar series is the pandemic is a portal, race, class, and gender. I would also want to thank our colleagues in Anthropology and Development Studies, especially Jonathan and Mary, for organizing extremely stimulating webinars in terms 2 and 3, despite the challenges of the lockdown. These colleagues were quite agile on their feet to make sure that our seminar series did not flounder because of the lockdown. If anything, the webinars which were hosted by Anthropology and Development Studies only served to galvanize our series as the webinar topics and attendance attest. Colleagues, before I introduce today's riveting seminar and speakers, I would like us to recognize that this is our UJ Sociology, Anthropology and Development Studies Seminar Series 20th anniversary, and this is no mean feat given the fact that this seminar series runs almost every week, and the fact that this consistency has been sustained over the past 20 years is just incredible, I think, and almost difficult to fathom, to say the least. This, I think, makes our seminar series the longest running consistent one, week in, week out, in South Africa, if not on the African continent. The seminar series has been able to attract all sorts of seminal scholars and larger than life activists who have spoken eloquently and knowledgeably on many different issues that affect our South African society over the past 20 years. And we are immensely grateful for that. At this juncture, colleagues, I would now like to welcome Prof Tina Ace, one of the brains behind the seminar series and our repository of knowledge and wisdom within the Department of Sociology, who was there when it all began, to say some few words about the seminar series. Tina, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Tapiwa. Yeah, I'll be brief. I joined UJ when it was still called Randse Afrikaans Universiteit in 1995. At that stage, the Sociology department consisted of 5 members of staff and about 400 undergraduate students. So we were a small department. And when I joined, I had lots of discussions with Professor Kees van der Waal, who was the head of the Department of Development Studies, about the idea of having regular seminars. So at that stage, we had seminars, ad hoc, and we started talking about the idea of having it regularly so that it's something that people can look forward to and can put in their diaries that it happens every week. When Kate Alexander joined us in 2001, we thought that this was the opportune time to start introducing such a seminar series. And initially, Kate was responsible for that seminar. We initially hosted it on a Friday afternoon. Can you imagine? People came on a Friday afternoon from 4 o'clock to attend the seminar. And we started from scratch to have it every Friday during term time. We hosted the seminar. It was quite a heavy load on the department. I remember in 2004, Kate was on sabbatical and I was responsible for organizing those seminars for the whole year. Yeah, so we've been kept busy. Eventually, things changed and the Center for Sociological Research moved out of the department and became separate. And they then introduced a seminar series of their own, which they also wanted to host on a Friday. And we then moved our seminar series to the Wednesday, and we started calling it the Wednesday seminar in order to give it a particular identity. I would like to recognize the contribution made by Dr. Lila Groenewald. There were a number of years when she was responsible for organizing the seminar, and she spent a lot of time and initiative in creating the structure of the seminar, more or less like it looks today. And it was also during the time that she was involved that Anthropology and Development Studies became involved in assisting us with organizing the seminar on a regular basis. I think we've done an amazing job, and I would like to thank everybody who's been involved in it over the years, especially Tapiwa this year, since, well, for a number of years already, for the excellent work that you're doing, and everybody who's involved in organizing the seminar. And I hope that in 20 years' time, we will still be hosting this seminar. Thanks, and enjoy. And I think it's particularly fitting that Professor Grace Kuno is presenting our 20th anniversary seminar today. Thanks.
Indeed, many thanks for sharing those insights on our highly esteemed seminar series, Tina. And thank you for the sterling vision and leadership which you have provided over the decades. Colleagues, I would now like to propose a toast to our UJ Sociology, Anthropology and Development Studies seminar series, and say that congratulations on the phenomenal run over the past 20 years, and here's to many more stimulating seminars in the years to come. Cheers, colleagues. Now, to today's webinar. This afternoon, colleagues, we have the honor of being graced by the presence of Prof. Grace Kuno. We shall be giving a talk titled Intersections, Theorizing the Experiences of Black Women in the South African Academy. Grace Kuno is currently a professor in the Sociology department at the University of Johannesburg. She is C-rated by the National Research Foundation, the NRF. Her research is in understanding the Black condition through a focus on gender, health, social policy, class, specifically the Black middle class, and social institutions. She has given over 60 national and international talks. Prof. Kuno writes creatively and academically, and has published peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, and research reports. Her most recent publication, Black Academic Voices, The South African Experience, which was published in 2019, was awarded the 2020 NIHSS Nonfiction Edited Volume Award. Many congratulations on your award, Prof. Grace, and welcome. Our discussant is Dr. Simphiwe Nojieza, who is currently the head of department and senior lecturer at the University of Zululand's Department of Anthropology and Development Studies. He recently worked at the University of Johannesburg's Department of Anthropology and Development Studies from 2014 to May 2018 as a lecturer and head of department. Welcome, Dr. Nojieza. Prof. Grace, I shall give you 30 minutes to make your case, and Simphiwe, I will give you a maximum of, I beg your pardon, Prof. Grace, I will give you 40 minutes. I will give you 40 minutes to make your case, and Simphiwe, I will give you a maximum of 10 minutes to respond. After that, I will open up the discussion to the floor. Prof. Grace, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Teps. Dumelang, Sanbonani, good afternoon. And thanks for inviting me, Trevor, to do the talk. I'm going to read parts of my presentation, and then at the end, I'm gonna share a few slides to make some of the points that I want to make. The identities of Black women are made complex by the divergent histories of the different African and diaspora countries they come from, and how these spaces experienced colonialism and other socioeconomic transformations. Again, what it means to be Black and a Black woman is further complicated by when and how these countries dealt with colonialism, independence, and how they deal with continuing coloniality, which we see in how different migrants are received and treated. The divergences emanating from geographical regions, particular histories with patriarchy, coloniality, complicate our endeavor to theorize on these experiences. What remains important, though, is the fact that Black women generally, and those in the academy, have had negative experiences with their multiple encounters with Euro-Western modernity. Even though Black women might have similar experiences of oppression, the differences in how these happenings manifest presents us with a mammoth conceptualization task. This complication is undoubtedly unraveled when using an international lens of analysis. However, my enthusiasm for the significance of intersectionality in helping us understand the dynamic experiences of Black women in the academy is the fact that when used critically, intersectionality can pay attention to and elucidate the complexities of using it beyond Euro-American societies. The concept of intersectionality. Hello? Was there a question?
All right, you can continue, Prof.
Okay. The concept of intersectionality, like many American theories and their socioeconomic artifacts, effortlessly travel across the world, which might create limitations with regards to how intersectionality is used in contexts outside of Euro-America, where it was born. However, critical engagement with the concept by authors like Pukuyasha provide an important lens to think about how intersectionality remains an important theoretical lens outside of its birthplace. Intersectionality is important and has become necessary in doing deliberate feminist analysis and has particular applications and meanings in various African contexts. Therefore, it is important to know that when theorizing the experiences of Black women academics, it is important to hold constant the tension emanating from the collective standpoint, which emanates from shared experiences resulting from their shared oppressive history, and in turn, the diverse experiences which are a result of intersections that lead to complicated and different experiences of nationality, race, gender, and class that are a result of varied histories of oppression experiencing the different context through the continent and the world. To illustrate how intersectionality is relevant for understanding Black women's academic experiences and the complexities in these understandings, this paper will illustrate how intersectionality remains useful for comprehending the experiences of Black women in the South African academy, and maybe also Black women elsewhere. Two examples from a review of literature on experiences from the South African Academy will be shared to illustrate how nationality in the context of Afrophobia and xenophobia in South Africa positions women from other African countries differentially as compared to Black South African women. This different positionality resulting from colonial conceptions of citizenship lead to divergent experiences of oppressions as a result of differential interactions at different points of engagement in everyday life. Thus, calling for a more nuanced discussion of women's experiences, which recognizes heterogeneity in Black women's lives. Secondly, the paper will show that the substance and value of Black women academics is questioned through everyday university institutional cultures. These cultures do not start and end in the academy, but are a reflection of broader societal cultures seen in social institutions, including the family, the courts, the workplace, and the police force. These institutional cultures have their basis in coloniality, patriarchy, and capitalism, where Black women are positioned as less human, invincible, without the power to look, comprehend, and speak. Although most of the experiences presented here are written from the South African context, they illustrate how the identity of Black women from multiple countries in the context of South Africa is marred by varied oppressions, which complicates the homogenizing tendencies on what it means to be a Black woman. What this paper argues is that continuing coloniality in South Africa, which is experienced in how questions of belonging are defined and how socioeconomic resources are accessed, makes visible the shared and divergent experiences of oppression that Black women experience. The intention of this paper is to raise awareness of the usually problematic solutions based on oversimplifications and essentializing explanations of Black women's experiences of workplace discrimination. Theorizing from the South and intersectionality. Here I want to speak about how intersectionality remains significant in theorizing experiences in the South and or in South Africa. The use of theories from the West has created challenges for understanding African contexts and how the intersecting identities of Black women impact their everyday life experiences. This has been so, especially in contexts where these theories are appropriated without a critical engagement with the circumstances around the development of those particular theories. The idea that Africa should be a consumer of theories developed in the West and that the West should be lead in theorizing is not only held by those in the West, it is perpetuated by those in Africa and other peripheral, so-called peripheral countries. This notion remains one of the biggest challenges of decolonization and for providing relevant concepts to understand and humanize experiences from African contexts. Tamale argues that repositioning both the geographical and conceptual locations of what is African will avoid the slippery terrain of the essence of who and what is African. In making a case for theorizing sexualities in Africa, Tamale further makes a case for interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary research. This, I believe, is not only a must for sexuality studies, but for most studies in Africa, so as to deepen our understanding of Black experiences. To make a case for the significance of intersectionality as a useful theory in South Africa, this paper engages with the following questions. Is intersectionality one of those grand theories exported from the North? I would like to say yes and no. In a talk a few weeks ago, Professor Gola asked pertinent questions of intersectionality. She alerted us to the originality of intersectionality as a theory that developed in the legal and policy sphere. And she also asked, how should we use it in other institutions? Can we use it in other institutions without limitations? And what would those limitations be? I think intersectionality can be argued to be a grand Northern theory only in contexts where its use is not critical and aimed at making it work for understanding contexts it is being used in. For example, Pukuyasha cautions that we need to encapsulate marginalization structures that are salient in other locales and the ways in which these hierarchies play out in transnational spaces. Doing this will allow use of intersectionality without the limitations of many grand northern theories. Intersectionality, as many of us know, first emerged from Black feminist work. It puts forward the idea that systems of race, social class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, and age form mutually constructing features of social organization which shape Black women's experiences and in turn are shaped by Black women, Collins asserts. To take it further, intersectionality allows us to restore the assumption that men benefit just because they are men, or whites because they are white, but that oppression is experienced in more complicated ways than that. Intersectionality allows us to hold constant multiple intersecting issues of oppression. For purposes of this paper, I will focus on two conceptual frameworks emanating from intersectionality. One is that which theorists on intersectionality have already provided detailed discussion, which maintains that intersectionality allows for the interrogation of conventional frames, and thus it challenges and dislodges traditional explanations. This is particularly significant when thinking about Black women and the other identities being expressed in South Africa and other African contexts. For example, traditionally, those identities expressed by Black women were understood from narrow, limiting perspectives. Intersectionality would have us do a more heuristic analysis. That is, it allows us to draw attention to dynamics that are constitutive but generally overlooked or silenced. For example, in Black academic experiences, the South African Black academic experiences, voices from South Africa, the experiences of Black academics is recentered as significant knowledge from trustworthy knowers. The work in the book attempts to do away with the traditional injustice of viewing experiences recounted by Blacks and most importantly by Black women as particularly suspicious. To draw attention to those traditionally overlooked and or silenced, intersectionality provides an analytical method that cuts across scales and thus provides a lens to challenge false binaries and illustrate important connections between systems of oppression. This is made possible by the matrix orientation central to intersectionality. Collins argues that this matrix of domination is the organization of power in a society, where specific matrix has a particular arrangement of intersecting systems of oppression. And these systems come together in a historically and socially specific way. Furthermore, Collins suggests that this matrix of domination is made up of 4 domains of power, namely structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal. How these matrices of domination work is fundamental in thinking about why intersectionality is a relevant analytical tool in Africa and South Africa. An important takeaway from intersectionality, which this paper intends to center, is the notion that there are few pure victims of oppression, and thus no single issue struggles because there are no single issue lives. This idea is an important one to remember as it challenges the simple theories that have the potential to trap Black women in unsaleable rigid conceptions. Having said that, I suggest that it is important to be context specific in our and endeavors to understand how the matrices of domination are experienced in different contexts. This is more so for South Africa, given that most knowledge consumed in the country is created from the West with Western contexts in mind. The second conceptual framework that is of interest in making a case for the significance of intersectionality in understanding Black women academics' experiences is that it teaches us to ask incremental and continuous interrogative questions, thus leaving limited space for self-fulfilling and limiting analytical approaches. Equal but different interlocking systems of oppression and intersecting vulnerabilities. In this section, I want to speak to how the experiences of Black women intersect differently depending on their individual subjective histories. The racial and gendered inequalities experienced in the academy have been debated and written about in many geographical contexts. What remains interesting is that Black women throughout the world share important experiences of exclusion and marginalization. This is not only true with regards to exclusions of Black women as knowledge producers, but with regards to Black women in different parts of the academic structure. In South Africa, research on the experiences of Black women is only gaining ground now, over 20 years into democracy. Many studies echo the argument by Rabe and Ruganan that the imbalances of race and gender do not seem to have disappeared. Instead, they reappear in new ways that seem to perpetuate the racial and gender inequalities of the past. In the introductory chapter of Black Academic Voices, the South African Experience, it is made clear how Black women grapple with intersecting matrices of power in their experiences in the academy. Furthermore, this introductory chapter indicates that Black women are not mere consumers of knowledge, but active knowers and knowledge producers. From this starting point, this talk will engage with how these historically excluded knowers create their knowledge of the academy as an uninviting space. I want to make a case for the argument that Black women can see and decipher power dynamics in ways that players in their context refuse to acknowledge. Magubane, in her piece, Ethnographies Showcases a Size of Knowledge Production and Indigenous Resistance, shows how the idea of Blacks as lacking the capacity to see or recognize racist and sexist realities is an act to objectify them and continue racism and the exclusions that come with it. This notion of the inability to recognize racism, Afrophobia, and sexism is also quite visible in the academy. I want to share two examples of how Black women see and act on what they see. The first example is of, I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Prof.
Tapiwa, can you see this? Okay.
We can see it, thank you.
The first example is of it's drawn from the chapter by Professor Batisai, who's a staff member in my department. The chapter is in the book, Black Academic Voices, the South African Experience. The title of Professor Batisai's chapter is Black and Foreign, Negotiating Being Different in the South African Academy. In this chapter, Batisai captures succinctly how, as a Black woman, she is othered because of her nationality. She makes the following points. She argues that African feminist scholars attribute the absence of Black women's voices to how conventional research often tribalizes such. Okay, I can't see the rest of the slides. So in the chapter, Professor Batisai speaks to her experiences as a Zimbabwean national in the South African Academy. And she illustrates the complexity of being Black, but Black and foreign, where she experiences similar experiences to Black South Africans, but then at other points, she is a foreigner, and how that impacts her ability to access all the privileges that are available in the academy. She argues that she argues, I infer that people constituting this category deal with a dual marginality that stems from a dual identity, that is Black and foreign. And I believe the way they deal with such marginality is core to the transformation discourse in South Africa. Professor Batisai argues that the experiences of Black foreign academics are noteworthy if South Africa is going to make a dent in transforming the academy. So in the chapter, if you go to the chapter, you see that Professor Batisai can see, not only see, but she can also recognize how she is being negatively positioned. And in the book, she is using that which she has recognized to speak back. So the chapter is an opportunity to speak back, as many of the other chapters are in the book. The act of writing about one's experiences is an indication that Black women can see and they can recognize what they see for what it is. And that book gave an opportunity for Black women to speak back and challenge the narrative that they are invincible and that they can't recognize when racism and power dynamics are at play. So this is the first example that indicates how Black women knowers know and how they use their knowledge to challenge the system. In this slide, I'm trying to show how there's power in speaking back, but also there's power in deliberate silence. Last year, September, on the 18th of September, we had planned a launch of the book at Wits. And as many of you might remember, during September last year, we had a lot of xenophobic attack happening throughout the country for many days. And we had prepared the launch for the 18th, and one of the speakers at the launch was going to be Professor Batisai. And a few days before the launch, she wrote an email to me, and the email read, I don't speak to the whole email, I just picked up this sentence from the email. She said, to say the least, I find this atmosphere very discouraging for me to talk about my chapter, let alone my foreign identity in its place in the academy. So this email by Professor Batisai was a choice to not deliberate in a space that does not humanize her. So, you know, historically, silence was seen as weakness, and silence was seen as not having the power to speak. But then in this case, we can see that Professor Batisai recognizes what is happening in the context, and she's able to take power and say, I am not going to speak in a context where I am dehumanized. So we see, firstly, the power to speak, and then now we see the use of deliberate silence. Both of these come from the ability of Black women academics to see when racism, when negative power dynamics are being used to position them in ways that are essentializing. During the time when we had the September 2019 launch, if you Google September 2019 xenophobia, you'll see a number of articles written. Some of the headlines read, 5 killed in attacks on foreigners in South Africa, xenophobia in South Africa, what happened to Ubuntu, xenophobia, violence flares in South Africa, again, xenophobia in South Africa. I wanted to read those headlines to indicate that as a Black woman at that time, I was alerted to the significance of deliberate silence at that time by Professor Batisai's emails. As a Black South African woman, I was not impacted like her. I knew there was xenophobic attacks. I listened to the news. I sympathized, but I was not personally affected. In the email that she sent me, she indicated that because she uses public transport, then she fears for her life, which is something during that time I, as a Black woman, was not dealing with. So, you know, so understanding that Black women experience oppression, racism, sexism differently is significant if we are going to be able to address these experiences. The third example that I wanted to share is how microaggressions that continue happening in the academy are an attempt to position Black women as not seeing, as not recognizing what they see or what happens in academic spaces. And this is a personal experience. I received an email around April when I was dealing with examination for some of my MA students. A colleague sent me the email, and the colleague had been talking to the person who sent the email from the faculty. And, you know, at the time I was unwell and I was not talking as much. I didn't have the energy all the time. I was just tired and sick. And, you know, and I didn't engage initially with this email until much later when I actually read it and I realized that it was problematic. The email read, forcing the supervisor to nominate to nominate someone new is the committee's way of punishing the supervisor for not using the correct form and thereby in effect refusing to be transparent, regardless of whether or not this was done intentionally. However, as a consequence of this direct correspondence, the higher degrees committee is willing to waive this punishment and allow the supervisor to nominate the same assessor using the latest version of the form, which I'm attaching here. So my response was to this email and a lot of other things that were said in this email. So I took issue with this email. Well, once I regained some energy, I took issue with the email and I wrote this response. I wrote the powers that be in the university to make them aware of this microaggression. So in my ability to see what was happening and my ability to write and alert management of this thing that was making me unhappy is one of the ways that Black women in the academy have the space not only to see and recognize what is happening, but also to fight back or to speak back. And this is what I said. I said, I'm writing this to alert you to conduct that I consider careless, harmful, and really distressing. Before outlining the facts that I want to focus on in bringing this grievance to your attention, I would like to make some broader but related points. People who look like me are often accused of being overly sensitive, constantly complaining, and looking for problems where there are none. The refusal to take microaggressions we experience seriously means that we often feel unheard, and that the issues and feelings of discontent build up and lead to unhappiness and possible intentions to leave. This email is an effort to act in a timely fashion so that we can maintain collegiality and also address problems as they arise. It is also an indication that I take myself seriously enough to act when I feel bullied by those with institutional power. It is in this spirit that I raise this matter with you. Below, I outline the sequence of events in chronological order. My own interpretation and accounting is in normal font, but emails that I use as evidence are in bold font. I received an email from the faculty that a third examiner had appointed was not acceptable because of potential conflict of interest. This decision did not make sense to me. However, for my peace of mind and to expedite the examination process, I started the process of finding another possible third examiner. In my effort to do this, I asked colleagues for possible examiners, including Prof G, who was the NAC for the examination process. Prof G was CC'd on the email from the faculty. Prof G also found the decision inconsistent, as like many of us, including me, have had examiners approved who we have had some form of intellectual relationship with. As a result of this observation, Prof G wrote to the FHD inquiring on this inconsistency. At the end of the email that I sent, I wrote the following. For a colleague to think that punishing a colleague is acceptable, and most alarmingly, to think it is okay to share this punishing with another colleague, contributes to an institutional culture that is toxic. Will Prof D resigned the use of the word punish if Prof G had not challenged this use? Resigning on use of the word does not take away the intention and how I and Prof G read the faculty decision to not accept the third examiner. The microaggression inflicted on myself and on Prof G is a clear indication of misuse of institutional power, which not only inflicts harm, but wastes already limited students and institutional resources. I'm not on a crusade to change the academy in one day. If I was, I would add a few other personal examples of how these microaggressions are used every day by persons in leadership positions. I'm letting you know of this one because I would like something done in this case. This behavior is unacceptable at so many levels, and something needs to be done to address it. We can't allow individuals who think colleagues need to be punished to sit in leadership positions. We need leadership with compassion. So in this experience, what is happening is that I recognize through reading a chain of emails that I'm being bullied, I mean, I saw that initially, but then when I actually read that the intention was to punish, and that this position, this powerful institutional position, was being used to put me in my place, I felt that I need to speak back. So we as Black women can see and we can recognize when we are being treated unfairly. and we have multiple ways of speaking back. However, as Kukua 2019 argues, part of the struggle concerns ambivalent feelings of knowing and unknowing, second-guessing personal experience of racial subjectification. Before writing this email, I struggled with whether I'm being too oversensitive, whether I'll be seen as being on a crusade to change the academy. And so Kikua is right. We might have spaces, we might be able to recognize when we are being dehumanized. But then, you know, we constantly feel unsure of what we are experiencing and what to do with it. I argue in conclusion that in theorizing the experiences of Black women in the South African academy, we need to recognize that they are not a homogeneous group, and that there is power in both deliberate silences and in speaking back, and that it is important for us to return the look. That is, asserting ourselves as human is significant for repositioning Black women as knowers and knowledge producers. Okay, so we sorry about that. So we need to recognize that it's significant to return the look, because returning the look signifies Black women as human, but also it does away with the assumption that we can't see and that we don't recognize what we see. However, what I also want to argue is that speaking back, although it has significance in terms of fixing the possibility of fixing the problem, it also might create more punishment where Black women are unable to get letters of recommendation or promotion or seats in important committees because they speak too much, because they are too loud. The two examples discussed here illustrate what Hooks calls the capacity to see or recognize reality. That is the reality that we are positioned unfavorably. The examples also show that we see the workings of the powerful institutional cultures and or policies used to subjugate us. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Many thanks, Prof. Grace. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that very enlightening and thought-provoking talk, which speaks to the realities of Black women scholars within the South African Academy. Many thanks, Prof, for your expose, which speaks to problematic and controversial issues which you have personally experienced as a Black woman academic earlier this year. I will now give our discussant, Dr. Nojieza, 10 minutes to respond to your talk. Dr. Simpiwe Nojieza, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Prof. Kuno, for the opportunity to reflect on the work, excellent work that you and the team produced. I noted that the editors presented their positionality, and they are Black women who are academics, who are part of the broader community of Black academics, with few Black males who contributed in the book. I noted that the chapter defined Blackness and provided a historical context, which you alluded to in your presentation. And I also noted that the term Blackness is defined. And again, some of the authors, they draw experiences from Black consciousness, others draw their experiences from Pan-Africanism, others draw their experiences from the work of the African Americans, like Grossfugas and others. What is key here is that the exclusion of Blacks and in particular Black women, is introduced, and the various contributions are anticipated in your introduction. I think the introduction was quite excellent because it tells us as readers what to expect. The book acknowledges the work of other scholars, such as Mabukela and Makubane, 2004, McNullo, 2009, and others. It says that the problem of exclusion of Black women is not just a recent problem, but it dates back to the dawn of democracy in South Africa. I was particularly struck by the work of Igua that you cited as well in your presentation. She tells a story of 5 moments of academic exclusion in her chapter. She gave examples in the manner that she also gave examples of a Black academic who's denied permission to attend a conference unless there's someone who's going to replace her as a coordinator while she's attending a conference. Whereas a white colleague was granted permission to go on a vacation leave, whereas a Black colleague was denied permission to attend a conference. Whereas attending a conference is part of your KPAs. A course module featuring naked Black males and females, which was resembling a colonial era, and that was problematic for Kikua as a course coordinator to how to accept that kind of type of stereotypes. And she also reflected on a security guard asking whether she's female or male. So that also shows that apart from being Black women facing exclusion, but they also face exclusion as Black lesbian women in academia. But again, what is important as well in all these experiences is the social capital that is drawing from people like Pumla Gola, Ellen Salom, and Mpokza, who congratulated her, who shared her moment of graduating with a PhD in the institution that she indicated in her work. I'm also struck by the work of your work, Prof Kuno, of the running shoes are now replaced by high heels. Again, you began by problematizing the whole notion of Black Economic Employment Equity Act, number 55 of 1998, which created a situation where Black and white female academics are treated more or less as part of the equity, designated groups kind of. So the emphasis were more on bringing more white women in the academy at the expense of Black women. And I also noted as well that you had a very good experience as part of social capital of being given a good mentorship, which assisted you to rise from lecturer, junior lecturer, to senior lecturer, to associate professor, to professor, and so on. So, but again, in the beginning, you problematize the whole idea of mentorship. I'm sure you'll reflect about that in the paper, because that is not well covered in the book, in your book chapter as well. And you also reflected as you conclude your chapter on your role as an NISS coordinator for Gauteng and all other interventions which you regard as safe spaces for Black and female academics. I'm also struck by Khoza Shangasem on intellectual and emotional toxicity. He narrates the journey pursuing a study field which is often associated as a field for whites in the medical profession, the audiology to be more specific. She was the only Black student during her undergraduate studies, even her master's as well. She was only surrounded by white classmates, and most Black patients relied on her, and she even assisted her white classmates to translate into local languages spoken in Gauteng. And her troubles started when she became an HOD, and she faced a whole range of revolts from her white academics who came with all sorts of rules and all sorts of issues when it comes to her ascending in the position of being an HOD. Some of them, they started even when to get an appointment in that institution. Some people are saying, but you study here, you can't be working here, those kind of things. And that highlights when you look at the issues about how the head of school supported her in a turn as HOD, that shows the relevance of the Black solidarity that you referred to, and also Paswana in a chapter also spoke about as well. This put emphasis on increasing the number of Black academics in historically white institutions, because you will need a shoulder to cry on when you face situations like the one that Khoza Shangas is narrating. And her disputed application for promotion to full professor is also a very common narrative in historically white institutions, that when you apply as a Black woman, precisely, obviously you are expected to do much more than the minimum requirements that are in the promotion policies of those institutions. You already made examples of Professor Patisai's chapter, but I just want to make few reflections of my own on Musela's contribution in the book. Musela talks more about Black consciousness in the academia. She talks more about how we can factor in literary African scholars in literary work or curriculum. But her narration is that when she did that, she faced a lot of resistance from students. But at the same time, that happened while students were calling for Rhodes Must Fall, those kind of campaigns, Rhodes Must Fall, campaigns like Fees Must Fall, and all those kind of initiatives. And then that sound like a contradiction, because students were saying we need to transform the curriculum. But there is a Black African woman who responds to that challenge, but she's facing all sorts of resistance. Another striking feature as well is that of a journal editor who only lived in Kenya for 50 years, who's also not even a native Swahili speaker, but questioning her ability to write, to cite a popular Swahili proverb, but here to toe the line and for her publication to come out. Otherwise, if she continued to challenge this journal editor, obviously her work was not going to be published. So that's one of the challenges as well that I noted. Again, I over and above what you said on the work of Patisai, she talks well about how she was downgraded from being a lecturer in one of many Zimbabwe universities, and also serving as a senior researcher in a number of international bodies. But she was downgraded to an ordinary tutor when she studied towards a PhD at UCT. Nobody took care of her experience as a researcher and experience as a lecturer. So this is similar to what Khoza Shangas referred to in a chapter as extended program designed for Black students. And if you look at historical Black universities, you don't get all these extended programs. So it's a way of these historical white universities to try to ensure that a Black student stay for 5 years in the system, stay for 6 years in the system in a manner of trying to discourage them. And also, if you look at, as I conclude, if you look at Rakanan's work as well, it's quite exciting that also she moved from historical Black university to historical white university, which is quite common, and she also spent a few years outside the academy. But her ill-treatment of being defined by not having a PhD when she started in a historical white university, each time a new member of staff is being introduced, she's just introduced as a coordinator. Obviously, she felt all those kind of brutality of not having a PhD in a historically white university when she was a black woman of Indian origin. This is a different experience to Paswana in a chapter who was always mentioned as Dr. Paswana whenever she was introduced, because in other words, having a PhD and as a postdoc in a historically white university gave her that kind of an exposure. It was always introduced as Dr. Paswana because she did something very unusual. But what is exciting about Rakanan's work is that her achievements, which includes completing a PhD, publishing 10 articles, graduating a number of master's students, becoming a reviewer of journals, and becoming a professor, that also indicate that she used agency. She did not just remain complaining about the brutality of being introduced as a coordinator because she didn't have a PhD. There was nothing in her name, but she turned things around. That is something that we Black academics need to be encouraging, that we form all sort of these associations on the safe spaces that you, Prof. Kuno, referred to in your book. And Paswana's limit of being and knowledge. Paswana's contribution is more of decolonial thoughts and Blackness analysis in the book. It draws inspiration to decolonial writers such as Gross Fugel and Jovukacheni. A humble beginning in Zebediela as a mathematics teacher, who eventually studied in the UK for a PhD, and inspired by Black History Month. All of those experiences enabled her to confront whiteness head on. Like Chelsea, in his book chapter, she had to deal with large classes of between 1,500 to 2,000 and so on. Despite all of this, she managed to get a Distinguished Teacher Award in 2014, a contradiction of getting a Distinguished Teacher Award, but scored below in a performance appraisal. I think those are some of the contradictions that you deal with in historically white institution. And she reflected in different experiences of campuses. For example, she used to work in Soweto campus, she used to work in APK campus, and she described in her book chapter the difficult conditions under which students in historical Black campuses deals with. And she used her postdoctoral studies and academic tenure as agency and driver for change. In my view, the book is refreshing in its analysis of Blackness and decoloniality in the post-apartheid era. The book reflects on initiatives such as mentorship, although, of course, there are different views on that. But in the case in your case, Prof. Kuno, mentorship really worked very well in your case, although it's problematic in other cases. Access to higher education, in the book chapter acknowledges that the number of students in historical white universities, number of Black students, particularly in historical white institutions, increases from 1994 up until now. And again, we saw performance appraisals as tools to advance white supremacy, and even promotion policies are still advancing whiteness in a number of the historical whites in institutions. And the case studies are very clear that race, gender, intersectionality, neoliberalism, and colonialism are remaining features which define higher education in South Africa. So in other words, all case studies reflected on agency, such as from take away your running shoes and then begin to wear your high heels, examples of legal challenges, examples of safer spaces, as well as Black excellence, which is reflected in quite a number of the book chapters. In those few words, I would like to congratulate you, Prof. Kuno, and your team for producing such an excellent piece of work.
Thank you very much for that robust and fascinating response, Simpiwe, to Prof. Grace's talk. And many thanks once again, Prof. Grace, for raising pertinent issues which confront Black women academics within our academy. Your talk was quite sobering and goes to show that we still have a long way to go with respect to making the playing field even within the academy, with respect to the treatment of Black women academics. Colleagues, at this juncture, I will now open up the floor to questions and comments. and I will take these in rounds of 3. Questions, comments from the floor. You can also, colleagues, you can also type your questions within the chat box, or you can post a comment within the chat box. I don't know, maybe to get us going, Prof Kuno, I'll just indulge myself as a chair and pose a question and possibly ask you to respond to some of the comments which came from Dr. Nojieza. So Grace, I'm curious, and I'm not sure whether you interrogated this in your book. But would say that the experiences of Black South African women within the academy are similar. That is those, I'm referring here to, your Black South African women, your so-called colored women and the Indian women. Are there any subtleties that are nuanced in some of the experiences of these Black women, or their experiences are more or less similar according to your study?
I think the experiences have nuances, and this is because of the history of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. So, for example, one of the things that I've been quite aware of since coming to UJ has been the numbers of colored students. So we usually have we have less numbers, and of those that we do have, almost none of them will register for a PhD. So that has been one of my biggest concerns. And in conversation with some of the students that some of the colored students that I've mentored, you find that some of them have been discouraged from registering for a PhD by their socioeconomic conditions, and also the idea, the public idea or public discourse around what it means to be Black. Many of them feel excluded from, from Black, and as a result, they don't feel that calls for Black students to apply for funding mean them. So with regards to that, true. And then, one of the things that we did as part of the broader study was dialogues. We had dialogues through, throughout a number of universities in the country. And one of the interesting things that came up in one of the dialogues in the Northwest, I think, was on exclusions with regards to Afrikaans, with regards to the use of Afrikaans. So in the Northwest, some of the participants were arguing that language is used as a marker to include or exclude. And some of the participants that referred to that considered themselves colored. So there are a lot of differences, and there are similarities. And I believe that it's important for us to recognize those differences, because it has a potential of helping us create solutions that will not continue to exclude.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Prof. Grace. I don't know whether you want to, at this juncture, engage with some of the comments that were given by Dr. Simpiwe.
Well, most of the Simpiwe gave more comments than questions. So one thing that I might want to speak to is the question of mentorship. I strongly believe that mentorship is important for development of upcoming academics. And I believe that one of the things that drives me is if we have constant questions that, when 7 years ago when I joined UJ, one of the biggest discussions in public discourse or academic discourse was that we don't have enough. One of the reasons why we don't have Black women in multiple positions in the academy is because they are not there. We can't find them, and as a result of hearing that constant discussion, one of the things that I think is important, and I do, is mentor young upcoming Black women, so that we stop using that as an argument. We can't 20 something years after democracy still make that argument that we don't have Black women when we appointing. And so I make it a point to mentor upcoming Black women into the academy. And I believe that that is significant because in my job in government, when I left the university after my PhD, I worked for government. And I felt that it was a maze. I didn't know which way was left and which way was right. And when I left that job, I came back to the academy. I was quite lucky to have access to someone who worked in transformation and who understood the limitations of the limitations in making those easy arguments that Black women are not interested or Black people want much better paying jobs. So he was quite central in helping me understand how to navigate the academy. And I believe that if we are going to address some of the challenges that we experience, we need to continue to mentor upcoming academics. Publications in the academy are quite difficult. I would not have made it if I, did not have help. I would throw questions at other Black women who were already in the space. One of them was Pumla. And, she came back, she gave me comments. And one of my first articles that I published when I came back to the academy, she helped me work on that and make it publishable. I believe that we have a responsibility to mentor because talking and complaining without making an effort doesn't help any of us. Yeah, I think from the comments from Simpiwe, that's the only one that I feel I could respond to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Prof. Grace. We have a question from the floor. It's from Pizze. So Pizze is asking you, Prof. Grace, as an external participant, where can I access Prof. Kuno's work on intersectionality? That's the first one. The second one is from Ms. Irene Marindi. Again to you, Prof. Grace. Was or is tribalism an issue in the experiences of Black women in the South African context. And the third one is, I think it's a compliment, Prof. Grace. Thank you to Grace and her colleagues for allowing discourse in on such an important topic. It certainly calls for the interrogation of personal experiences as a young South African Indian professional. And the last one from the chat box, this is from Suzal. Hi, Prof. Thank you very much for this presentation. It was really interesting, and I could relate to many of the things you have mentioned. The issue of microaggression in particular is a challenge. For now, Prof, I don't know whether you might want to respond to Pizze. Pizze wants to know where he might access, or where you can access your works, Prof, especially on intersectionality. And Ms. Marindi has posed a question on whether one's ethnicity counts when it comes to their experience as a Black woman academic within the South African context.
This paper that I was reading, I'm planning to publish it, and it's my first real engagement with the concept of intersectionality. In the other works that I've put out, I have not engaged in detail with intersectionality, but one can access some of them online, like Google Scholar, and the book can also be accessed from the HSRC Press website. So yeah, you can access this book on the HSRC Press website. Marindi, I think it does matter. For example, when we were in, I think in Limpopo, when we were having the dialogue in Limpopo, one of the things that came out in that discussion, which was quite sobering, was how easy it is to engage with gender in historically, with sexism and gender issues in historically white universities. And some of the issues that we deal with as women in historically white universities are quite different when in historically Black universities. You know, it becomes quite challenging for women to deal with some of the experiences of sexism and harassment in those spaces. The work that needs to be done in those spaces is apparently much more than in historically white universities. And another thing that also came out, and I mean, one hears in public discourse how applying for jobs in the historically Black universities sometimes has tribalism linked to them. So you won't get a job because you are Kuno, not Mhlekazi or something, you know. I'm not sure how true some of those are because I have not seen research on them, but you hear stuff like that. The cliques issue, I think, it's hair is not a women's issue per se. It's hair. All of us have hair. But what I find interesting is that because it's used to racialize, it affects everyone. And I think the reason why there has been so much around this one at this time is because, you know, since the Fees Must Fall movement, there has been quite an improvement, if one can say, in how Black people see themselves and how they want to be positioned. So dehumanizing tactics are not as easy to ignore as it used to be. Yeah, Taps, I think I answered everything.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Tobani has got his hand up. Tobani, you can go ahead. You can pose your question.
Thank you, Prof Tapia, and thank you, Professor Grace. I had actually just typed up the question in the comment section, but I guess I could read it. I think my question was really around the ways in which the South African Academy rewards certain forms of Blackness, and the ways in which those forms of Blackness are often weaponized against each other. And I was thinking specifically here about the issue of the ways in which, for instance, foreign nationals and Black South Africans are often pitted against each other in the academy. And so I was wondering, you know, and I think this would be my critique of the book, that it didn't really go into this issue, which a lot of us knows is quite prevalent. For instance, the ways in which foreign nationals are often rewarded and Black South Africans are pitted as always complaining, lazy, and so on. And I was wondering how you are thinking about these issues of intraracial anti-Blackness within the South African Academy, because it's not always a pure issue of whiteness and Blackness, but there are those intra-racial challenges that we often have to grapple with. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation, and the book is almost a Bible for me at this moment.
Excellent, Tobani. Prof Grace, would you want to have a go at Tobani's question?
Thank you, Tobani. I think that's an important question, and I try to speak to it a bit in my chapter in the book. You know, where the recognition is that, you know, for Black women, this weaponizing of differential experiences of Blackness, you know, it's important for us to recognize it and to indicate that we see it and we know what it is trying to do. Because one of the things that I think it pushes xenophobia is the history of this weaponizing and the fact that it has not been engaged with critically, that you know, Blackness as difference is used as a weapon, but the problem is that it is used as a weapon to deal with Black people, you know. You know, and as a South African, you might say that this thing happens only in South Africa, but as a South African, if you move to New York, you will be used against African Americans, you know. And so it calls for critical engagement, and we need to, you know, to recognize it for what it is and be critical and challenge it, because at the end of the day, especially when we're thinking about Black women, there's very few of us, you know, to compete against each other. There is just too few of us, you know. So I want us to, you know, to write about it, to talk about it, because if we don't see it, or if we pretend like we don't see it and we don't recognize what it is, then we don't have an opportunity to come up with solutions that will humanize all of us.
Excellent, Prof Grace. I have a question from Sally Ledwaba. So she poses the question: what has kept you going, Prof, within the academy? I also have a second question for you in this particular round from Ms. Lesejo Linda Plank. So she asks, well, Prof, thanks for a beautiful and stimulating conversation. What are your thoughts on the intersectional position of women, especially Black women, in the academy with respect or in the wake of COVID-19?
So in my chapter, I talk about safe spaces. And I argue that we have to create those safe spaces ourselves. And for me, that has kept me going. And most recently, what has kept me, especially this year, is understanding, you know, we throw this word self-care around. We throw it around like self-care, self-love. And when we throw it around, we're linking it to shopping, you know. And this year, I've recognized what it really means. And I think for the coming few years, that understanding it deeply will keep me going, because for the past few years, I didn't know what it meant. So self-care, you know, if you read African American feminist writers, they write about it, and you know, it's fundamental. As Black women, we can only survive if we recognize that we are not machines, and if we recognize that no, saying no is not an insult, you know, and most importantly is recognizing that we will change the academy one day at a time. You don't have to do 50 days of work in one day. Then the struggle will just collapse, you know, with you. So the most important thing is to recognize that self-care is quite significant. And no is a big part of it. Saying no is a big part of that self-care. COVID-19, I think for me as a privileged Black middle-class professor, it has been very different from many other women who don't have the security that I have. For many of us in the academy, we've had the security of knowing that we will get paid every day, every month, of, you know, being able to transform how we work very quickly, you know, to stay connected, to do Zoom meetings, Zoom seminars, you know. So I feel strongly that for me as a Black middle-class professor, this year, the challenges of this year actually showed me how privileged I am. I could go and stock up on food and sit in my house, you know, without, you know, the need to go stand in queues for food parcels and all that. You know, so what I think this moment has shown is how our experiences as Black women are very different depending on your class, you know, where you are geographically and so forth. And I think it also indicates the significance of, you know, acknowledging those differences, because without acknowledging them, once again, our solutions will continue to be on the margins. Thank you.
Many thanks for those very wise words, Prof. Grace. Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'm very, very sorry to say this, but unfortunately, we have now run out of time. It's now 4:30, and we have to adjourn, unfortunately. So we have run out of time, and I would like to thank Prof. Grace and Dr. Nojieza for managing to generate a very thought-provoking and fascinating discussion for today's webinar, which touched on a very raw nerve that confronts us within the academy today. Thank you so much once again, Prof. Grace and Dr. Nojieza. And thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. And see you next week when we shall be hosting Mosilo Motepu, who shall be giving a talk titled Experiences of a Whistleblower. Goodbye, everybody, and have a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teps, and everyone. Thank you.